Hey, what's up, Flowriders? Today we're going to be talking about moving your feet around on the board. Ever have the problem where your feet get out of place on the board and you can't get them back to a good position? So you either have to stop your run or you have to ride up on the nozzle to readjust them and start all over again. Or you can just continue your run with your feet out of place and it just turns into like an awful wasted run. Well, today in part one of this three-part series on foot movement, we're going to show you the secret to sliding your feet around on the board while you're riding it. This is an essential skill which you will constantly be using during your runs. So if you want to know this little gem of a secret, then stick around. Moving your feet around on the board is a skill that you must have. Why is it so important? First, most every time you land a trick, your feet will be out of position, and you'll need to know how to get them quickly back into a good riding position. Second, just from the pressure of normal riding, from time to time your feet will be a little out of position, so you need to learn how to get those fine adjustments to get your feet exactly back to where you want them. And third, for certain tricks, you will need to use a starting foot position that is unique to that trick. A good example of this is a kick flip, where you need to move your foot out to the side to kick it around. So moving your feet around on the board is extremely important. Now, there are three ways to move your feet around on your board. You could take steps on the board. You can slide your feet around on the board. And you could do something called a foot wiggle. Today we're going to show you the sliding your feet around and the foot wiggle, because these are the two techniques that you'll be using 95% of the time, and you'll be constantly adjusting your feet all throughout your runs. We'll show you the lesser used stepping method in the last part of this foot movement series. Now, the biggest problem in moving your feet around on the board is that if you lift one of your feet to move it, it causes instability and leads to a quick wipeout. Let's just go over where you can stand on one foot and where you can't. Now, this middle zone here is where you can lift up one of your feet and the board is still rideable. It's very unstable to ride on one foot, but some people actually make a trick out of it. I tried it, and as soon as I lifted my foot off the board, I was ready to wipe out. Now, if you have your front foot on the nose of the board and you try to pick up your back foot, then the weight of your foot will cause the nose to submerge and the board will submarine under the water. And finally, if you're in a normal skateboard riding position with your rear foot all the way to the back of the board over the tail, and you try to raise your front foot to readjust it, then the board will do a wheelie, and as you raise your front foot, the board will rise up also and stay in contact with your front foot. This gets unstable really fast also. And because the board remains in contact with your front foot, you really can't slide that front foot around anyway. So this is no good also. What is needed is a way to keep the weight on both your feet and still be able to slide them around at the same time. The secret to moving your feet around on the board is a technique called heel and toeing. Now, the way this works is really quite simple. We're going to be pivoting on either the heel of our foot or on the ball of our toes to move our foot back into proper position. This allows us to keep half of our foot on the board to apply weight, while the other half of our foot is free and light enough to slide around into a new board position. So how is this done? If you need to move your back foot, then shift the weight of your back foot to the heel of the foot. Now slide your toes across the board. You don't have to pick your toe up off the board. I'm just doing this to show you the technique better. Just make it light enough so that it's easy to slide. Once your toes move back, you're now going to shift the weight of your front foot from your heel to the ball of your foot. This will make the heel of your foot light, and you can slide it over the board as you pivot on the ball of your foot. You can repeat this process as many times as you need with each foot to get your feet back into proper riding stance. A second technique that we use to move our feet is called the foot wiggle. It's a lot like heel toeing, but you're just pivoting side to side on the ball of your foot, which will allow you to make small, fine adjustments to your foot position. What it feels like in reality is you're just wiggling the heel of your foot as you're putting pressure on your foot to move it in the direction that you want to go. Where this is used is when you want to move your foot across the width of the board in either direction, or when you're making those final fine adjustments. When you're moving up and down the length of your board, you'll be using the heel toeing technique. But if you're moving across the width of the board, then the foot wiggle is a lot more efficient. So if your heel is hanging off the edge, but in the correct position lengthwise, you can toe wiggle it back into the proper position. If your toes are hanging off the board, you can do a toe wiggle to get it back onto the board. Or if your foot is already in the correct position, but you want to move it towards your heel to get into a kickflip position, you would use it there also. The second situation that it's used is once you get your feet back to the correct position, you can do the fine-tuning adjustments with the foot wiggle. Wiggle your toes around and feel the back edge to get that perfect position and get ready for your next move. Now, big point number one. Remember, your heels and toes never fully come off the board. They just unweigh enough to easily slide across the board surface. Big point number two. Just to clarify, you can start sliding either your heel or your toe first, depending on what needs adjusting first. But what I discovered by breaking down video is that when your feet are moving in an outward direction from the middle of your body, you usually move the toe first and then the heel. And when they're moving inward, you start with your heel first and then the toe. It's not natural to move your toes inward and be pigeon-toed. So if I'm too far up on the board, my back foot is moving outward, so I go toe first, then heel. Now my front foot is moving inward, so it's more natural to start with the heel first, then move the toe. And finally, big point number three. We only do 1 foot at a time. Heel toeing 2 feet at the same time is unstable, but we'll alternate one movement at a time just to get into a rideable position, and then we'll start readjusting afterwards. Here are some generalities that apply to most situations. Number one, the two biggest problems are having either your toes or your heel hanging off the edge, and also having too narrow of a stance. If both of these are happening at the same time, then most of the time you can address both of these issues with one move. So if your stance is too narrow and your toes are hanging off like this, then your first move would be to bring your toe back onto the board like this. This will bring both your toe back onto the board and widen your stance to give you a better base. Number two, everything else being equal, usually you'll start by getting your back foot into position first, because that's where all of your control is. You need to get your toes and your heels over those back control edges so that you can maneuver the board for whatever is about to happen. Once that's done, then you can finish your foot adjustments. So what's the best way to practice foot adjustments? Start by doing these in your living room. Walk your feet around on the board using big pivots. Then when you get your feet almost in perfect position, use the foot wiggle to do the fine adjustments. Start in narrow stances, start in wide stances. Start with your toes or your heels sticking out over the edge. Whichever foot you're adjusting, make sure that you're keeping proper weight on it. This exercise will help you get a lot of muscle memory before you ever get out to the wave and try it there. Once you get to the wave, try all those things that you did in your living room. Get your feet in bad positions and slide them around into a good position. Just keep constantly adjusting your feet, and soon enough your muscle memory will take over. Also, work hard on those fine adjustments using the foot wiggle. Good riders are always adjusting their feet until they lock into that perfect position. That's kind of it, but the last thing I'm going to do is narrate some different scenarios and give you some ideas on how to move your feet in the real world. I just aimed a GoPro down at my feet and did a bunch of shove-its, And to be perfectly honest, I had no idea how my feet synchronized with each other, and I was actually quite surprised at some of the alternating movements, but here they are. As I was reviewing video footage, this foot sequence was by far the most common one that I was seeing. In this case, my feet have landed too narrow lengthwise, but they are fine side to side. The first move is to move my rear toes back over the control edge so that I have some better control. Then my front toes move forward, followed by my front heel, so that now my front foot is back in position. Then I finish up by adjusting my rear heel backward. Now my feet are back in proper riding position, and I just need to do a little fine tuning. As you can see, this is all done before I reach the nozzle. Next situation is almost the same as the first, but my forward foot toes are hanging off the board. It's the same basic pattern. I slide my rear foot toes back over the toe control edge, then my front toes slide forward, but swing back down onto the board exactly where they need to be. Then swing the front heel forward so that now my front foot is back in position. Then finish up by sliding my rear heel backward. Here's one where both feet are completely out of position. I completed the shove it, and my front foot has the heel hanging off and the back foot has the toe hanging off. My first move is to swing my rear toe over the back control edge, followed by swinging the rear heel over the heel control edge. Now my rear foot is back in position and I have good board control. Now my forward heel is just so far off the board that I want to swing it quickly back onto the board instead of doing a slower foot wiggle. The severe angle of my foot now allows me to swing the toes up closer to the toe edge and proper position. Then my heel swings forward to get the foot to the proper angle. Then a foot wiggle will finish getting the front foot into proper riding position. Last one I'll show you is where I alternate the foot movements a few times. After the shove it, my feet land way too close together. I do a quick front foot toe and heel slide, and that gets my front foot about halfway to where it needs to be. Then I alternate feet by moving my rear toe and heel back over the control edge, so now my back foot is where it needs to be. Then I alternate to my front foot again and do one more toe and heel slide, and now my feet are back in position. So those are the basics for heel toeing and foot wiggles. With practice, those will become unconscious movements, and you'll start to look and feel more comfortable on your board. Remember, there is no set order in the foot movements. Although my feet follow basic patterns, they do move in different orders depending on the situation, and your feet may move differently based on what feels most comfortable to you. Check out part 2, which will cover more advanced and competition situations, and part 3 will cover taking big steps on the board. So go hit your wave, practice this stuff, and have a great time. See you on the next video.